My name is Roland Kirby. I am 57 years old, and my son called me on a Thursday morning to say his fiancée's family would prefer I wasn't at the wedding. He didn't say it like that. He took 15 minutes to work up to it, asked how the shop was going, whether I'd had a good drive down to pick up lumber last week. I knew something was coming the way you know a storm is coming up over Georgian Bay. The air changes before anything moves. Dad, he finally said. Claire's mother has some concerns. I set my coffee down. What kind of concerns? About the wedding, about how it looks, about he stopped, about the kind of people being there. I stayed quiet for a moment. You mean about me being there? He didn't say yes, he didn't say no. That silence said everything. My son is 31. He met his fiancée 2 years ago at a conference in Toronto and brought her up to Muskoka the following summer. She seemed kind, quiet in a careful way, the kind of quiet that comes from being taught to measure every word. I liked her well enough. I couldn't say I'd really gotten to know her. The visits were short, and her mother was always somewhere in the background of the phone calls. A name dropped often, an opinion mentioned casually, shaping things without touching them directly. That's what her mother said, I told him, not her. He went quiet again. Is this what you want? I asked, or what someone has decided for you? He didn't answer. My son is a good man. He has his mother's eyes and his own version of her patience, which sometimes looks like strength and sometimes looks like not knowing where the line is. I've been watching him for 31 years. I told him I'd think about it. That wasn't true. I'd already decided. I just needed to say something so he wouldn't feel the full weight of what had just happened all at once. I put the phone down on my workbench and stood there in the shop for a while. Cedar shavings on the floor, a half-finished cabinet for the Desjardins place propped against the far wall, the smell of linseed oil that soaked into every board and beam of that building after 3 decades of work. My wife would have known exactly what to say. She always did. She died when my son was 14, a January that moved through our house like weather we couldn't get out of. I raised him the rest of the way alone, packed his lunches, drove him to hockey practice in Bracebridge at 5:30 in the morning, sat in the back of every school play where he had 2 lines and delivered them like they were the whole show. I wasn't a perfect father. I was present, there's a difference, and I think it's enough. Now I was being told my presence was the problem. Before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand what I do, because it matters more than I knew it would at the time. I am a heritage restoration specialist. What that means practically is that I work on old buildings, structures from the late 1800s and early 1900s, properties protected under the Ontario Heritage Act. When someone wants to restore or develop one of those buildings, they need sign-off from a certified specialist who can verify the work meets conservation standards. The province keeps a registry. The designation takes years of training and assessment, and it's not a category where you cut corners. Because these buildings carry history, and history doesn't give you a second chance to get it right. There are 4 certified specialists in all of Ontario. One works out of Ottawa, one is based in Hamilton, retired last autumn and moved to his son's place in Kelowna, and one has his workshop on a side road outside Gravenhurst, in a building that used to be a feed store in 1908 and still has the original pine floor underneath everything. That's me. I never told my son any of this in so many words. It didn't seem like the kind of thing a father announces. You earn what you earn, you let the work speak. I'd built enough in this region over 30 years that the buildings did the speaking without any help from me. My sister came for supper the following Sunday. She's 2 years older than me and has lived 5 minutes away my whole adult life, which is either a blessing or the definition of Muskoka. She got it out of me before the soup was cold. He actually said that, she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. You're going anyway. No. Roland. I'm not going to put him in the middle of his own wedding, I said. I'm not going to make him choose in front of her family. Not on that day. She set her spoon down. That woman decided your worth based on your truck and your calluses. She's going to run his whole marriage the same way. You know that. I know it. Then why are you sitting here making it easy for her? Because it's not about her. I looked at my sister across the table. It's his day. If me being there costs him something that takes years to repair, I won't be the one who made him pay that price. He has to live in that family long after the photographs are taken. My sister knew me well enough to know I'd decided. She didn't like it. She refilled her own water glass, which was her version of making peace without agreeing. What she didn't know, what neither of us knew, was that something was already moving toward all of us that none of us had set in motion. There is a property at the edge of Lake Rosso, up the Eastern Shore Road, a few kilometers past the public boat launch. It's been there since 1891. The original structure was a fishing lodge built for a Toronto industrialist who brought his family up every August. The main building is timber frame and lake stone, with 3 additions that went up in the 20s, the 40s, and the 60s. For the last 15 years, it sat empty and locked. The Muskoka Heritage Trust had it on the protected registry. No developer had touched it because no developer had gotten the permits through. Last spring, a development group out of Toronto acquired it. They announced plans to restore it as a boutique hotel, 12 rooms, a restaurant, event space for weddings and corporate retreats. The kind of project that generates a lot of press releases and a lot of goodwill in a region that gets anxious when old things disappear. I read about it in the Gravenhurst Banner and thought nothing much about it. Projects like this come and go. Half of them stall before the foundation is touched. Then I heard the name. I was at the diner on Sharp Street one morning in October, and 2 men in the booth behind me were talking loud enough that stopping myself from listening would have required real effort. One of them worked for a construction firm the development group had hired. The other I didn't recognize. "The whole thing is stuck," the first one said. "Heritage Trust won't release the permits until there's a specialist review. Independent sign-off on the restoration plan. Who are they using?" That's the problem. The guy they hired had been flagged on a project in Barrie. Submitted a report without doing the full site assessment. Trust won't accept his name anymore. So they need someone clean. Someone the Trust actually accepts. There are a handful of people in the province who carry that weight. The firm put in calls. One's in Ottawa, booked solid for 2 years. One's retired. They're trying to track down the last one. Apparently he's local. Up here somewhere. I stirred my coffee, kept my eyes on the paper. The development group, one of them said, the Caldwells. Big family out of Toronto. This hotel is their flagship project. They borrowed heavily against it. If the permits don't come through by end of quarter, the whole thing could unravel. The Caldwells. My son's future in-laws. I left the diner and sat in my truck for a few minutes before I turned the key. On my workbench back at the shop, there was a letter from the Muskoka Heritage Trust that had been sitting unopened for 3 days, buried under a set of drawings for a cornice repair in Huntsville. I'd been busy. I'd been putting things aside. I drove back, found the letter, held it. Then I set it back down and picked up the Huntsville drawings instead. I don't entirely know why. Some part of me wasn't ready. Some part of me knew that whatever was in that envelope would complicate the particular kind of quiet I'd been sitting with. And I needed one more day inside it before everything changed. I want to be honest about what I thought in those weeks. I thought about what it would mean to decline the review, to let the letter sit, or to send a brief note saying I wasn't available, and let the Caldwells find someone in Ottawa who wouldn't be free for 2 years. Their project would freeze. Their permits wouldn't come. That boutique hotel, the one they'd borrowed against, the one they'd announced to the press, would stall while the interest compounded and the family name took a quiet hit in the Toronto development circles where it mattered most. I could do nothing, and that would be enough to hurt them. It wouldn't even require a lie. I'm telling you this so you understand what I chose and why it matters. I didn't decline. I opened the letter. I called the trust and told them I was available. I scheduled the first site visit for a Tuesday in November. The reason had nothing to do with the Caldwells and everything to do with the building. That lodge on Lake Rosso has stood for 135 years. The timber frame in the original structure is hand-cut from old-growth white pine that doesn't exist in the province anymore. The lake stone foundation was laid by men whose names aren't in any record I've ever found. There are mortise and tenon joints in that building that took a craftsman 4 times as long as a modern fastener and will outlast anything you could put in its place today. I am not going to let that building get a careless restoration plan because I'm in a dispute with the family that owns it. The building didn't do anything to me. My son called the week before the wedding. His voice was different, lighter, The way a voice gets when something that's been pressing on it has finally moved. "Dad," he said, "I want you to come to the reception." "I thought you'd already decided that." "I was wrong." He paused. "We were wrong. I should have said that sooner." I asked what changed. He took a breath. "His mother's way, before the true thing comes out." "I was at the rehearsal dinner," he said, "and her mother was talking to a friend. Said you couldn't come because you wouldn't know how to conduct yourself around certain people." I sat at that table and didn't say anything. Then I drove home and I thought about every single thing you've ever done for me without once making me feel like I owed you for it. I called my fiancée and told her things were going to be different going forward. "That took courage," I said. He was quiet for a second. "I learned it somewhere." I put on a good jacket, dark gray, the one I'd bought when he graduated from Waterloo, and I drove down to Bracebridge. The reception was at a converted 1920s hotel with a grand staircase and a view of the water. The kind of venue that costs what it costs and makes no apologies for it. I was standing near the entrance garden when her father found me. He'd seen a photograph, I think. My son had one on his phone from a fishing trip 2 summers back. Her father came across the grass in a suit that fit him the way expensive suits do. And he stopped a few feet away, with the look of a man who has more to say than he knows how to start. "You're Roland Kirby," he said. "I am." He exhaled slowly. "I've been trying to reach you through the Heritage Trust." "I know." He looked at me carefully. He was a man who'd built a career on reading rooms and reading people. And right then he was trying to read me and finding it harder than he'd expected. "The review," he said. "Is it?" "It's going to be honest," I told him. "Same as it would be for anyone. If the restoration plan meets the standard, I'll say so. If it needs work, I'll say that too." He was bracing for the other part, the "you know what your family did" part. "I don't use my work to settle personal scores," I said. "I never have. What happened with your family and me doesn't belong inside a professional report. Those are 2 separate things, and I won't let one contaminate the other." He stared at me for a moment. That wasn't what he'd prepared for. Things moved quickly after that. My son came out with his wife on his arm, and she crossed the last few steps at a run and put her arms around my neck in a way that made the garden go quiet. Then her mother appeared from across the lawn with her hostess expression on, the smooth, managing smile. She didn't recognize me at first. "And who is this?" she said brightly. My son answered before anyone else could, his voice level and clear. "This is my dad, Roland Kirby." He put his hand on my shoulder. "The heritage specialist the Muskoka Heritage Trust is sending to review your Rosso project, and the man who raised me by himself for 17 years, and who should have been here from the beginning." I watched her face do the work of rearranging itself. A man near the back of the garden stepped forward, silver-haired, the kind of quiet authority that doesn't need to announce itself. He put his hand out to me. "Harold Fenwick," he said, "Ontario Heritage Trust, board member. I've been hoping to meet you in person for years. Your work on the Beaumont Mill restoration is still the standard we cite to other practitioners. It's an honor." The guests murmured. Her father gave a slow nod, the kind that means a man is recalibrating something large. Her mother stood in the middle of all of it, and for maybe the first time in a long while had nothing to say. My daughter-in-law took my arm and turned to face the garden. "This is my father-in-law," she said, her voice steady and carrying. "He built things with his hands his whole life. Real things that are still standing. I'm proud he's here." I had not expected that. I felt something loosen in my chest. Her father came to my office the following Monday, before I'd started the formal report. He sat across from me and said his piece without being prompted. "I let my wife make decisions she shouldn't have made," he said. "I do that more than I should. What she said about you, what I allowed by saying nothing, it was wrong. I wanted to say it plainly." "I accept that," I told him. "And I'll say this once. Respect that only shows up when someone needs something from you isn't really respect. The test isn't how you treat me now that you know my name is on your permit file. The test is the next tradesperson who comes through your door, the one you've never heard of. That's where it counts." He nodded. "That's fair." I opened the restoration plan and we got to work. The review took 4 weeks. I walked the Rosso property 7 times. I went through every stone in the foundation, every beam in the original frame, every addition that had been attached and reattached across 130 years of Muskoka winters. The plan had problems. The moisture barrier system the hired firm had specified wasn't appropriate for lake stone construction. It would trap condensation and start degrading the mortar within a decade. The East Edition had a load-bearing issue the original structural drawings had obscured. 3 windows in the 1924 wing that the plan proposed replacing entirely needed to be restored in place, which is what the Heritage Act requires and what the building deserved. I wrote every finding up exactly as I found it. It cost them time and money, 6 weeks of revision, and an additional $200,000 in remediation. Her father could have accused me of inventing problems where there were none. He didn't. When I walked him through the report, he sat quietly, and then he asked, if we'd built it the way the original plan showed, how long before it started showing damage? 10 to 15 years on the moisture issue, I said. The load problem, less predictable, could fail badly in a heavy snow year. He nodded slowly. Then thank you, he said, for not telling us what we wanted to hear. That is the only kind of report I know how to write. Her mother sent a card a few weeks later, handwritten, which I was told was not typical for her. She wrote that she had misjudged me and that she was sorry. It was brief. I think brief was the honest version, and honest cost her more than polished and long would have. I kept the card. I don't need to show it to anyone. I just know it's there. My daughter-in-law set her own boundaries with her mother, calmly, on a phone call the month after the wedding. She told me about it without drama, the way she tells me most things now that we've gotten to know each other in ordinary time, after the extraordinary week. She told her mother that my son and I would be at every family table going forward, that I would be the grandfather her children knew, and that none of that was up for discussion. Her mother listened. She didn't push back. She hit something solid, my daughter-in-law told me afterward, and solid things don't move. I recognize that. It's how foundations work. This past September, the 3 of us drove up the East Shore Road to look at the property. The restoration was nearly complete, the original framing exposed and refinished, the lake stone repointed and breathing the way it was designed to, the windows exactly where they'd always been. My son stood beside me at the water's edge and said it looked like it had been there forever. That's what good restoration means, I told him. You don't erase time, you honor it. His wife came and stood on my other side and took my hand without saying anything for a while. Then she told me they were expecting. She said she'd wanted to tell me here, where I'd done work that would last. I looked out at the lodge and the lake and the particular stillness that comes off Ontario water in the fall. I thought about everything that had come close to staying broken. I thought about my son at 14 and the winters we'd gotten through, and the man he'd become across every year I'd spent not knowing whether I was doing it right. I thought about a letter that sat unopened on a workbench for 3 days, about what I could have done with it and what I chose to do instead. The wind came off the lake the way it does in Muskoka in September, clean and cold and certain. I put my hand over hers. A building built right doesn't need permission to stand. It just stands. Season after season, holding weight that the people inside it never think about, which is exactly the point. That's always been enough for me.